Hello, everyone. My name is Debbie Grant. I'm the CEO of the Jewish Federation, and it is my true honor to welcome you all here tonight. This Jewish Community Study is something that this community has needed to do for a very long time, and I know you won't be disappointed by what you learned tonight. We are really excited to welcome Dr. Ira Sheskin back to Indianapolis. He has been our demographer and has been working with us for the past year and a half. And Indianapolis is his 52nd Jewish Community Study that he's completed over the last several decades throughout North America. And you'll see a lot of references to that when he jumps into his slides. But his guidance and his insights have been invaluable for this effort. We thank you so much for your leadership in that. I want to give a special thank you to Gigi. Where are you, Gigi? Gigi, oh gosh, Mark Belcher, sorry. I just told her I'd never get nervous, too. Gigi has chaired this effort for us. She took this on with one simple request and really dove right into it. It's been hundreds of hours of work, as you can imagine, from putting together the questions that we wanted to ask, figuring out what were the most important questions to ask, all the way through the marketing, and when you leave tonight, you'll see an incredible booklet that we put together with the help of the marketing team at the JCC. I also want to thank Sheila Yuckman, who has been our coordinator on the staff of the Federation, and we would not be where we are today without these two women's leadership and incredible help in getting us here. Towards the end of Ira's presentation, we're going to have a question and answer period. So if you have any questions, please kind of hold them till the end. There are microphones on either side of the room, and we'll try to bring them around to you, or you should feel free to get up and come over to a microphone. But if you can hold them till the end, we would appreciate it. We also did a contest that we had lots of people answer. And on this board are the answers and the winners to the questions. So before we get to Q&A, we'll reveal who the winners are for the survey questions. I also want to let you know that the study itself is more than 900 pages. We obviously are not presenting all 900 pages to you tonight, or we would be here until tomorrow morning. But it will all be uploaded at the beginning of December onto our website and also onto jewishdatabank.org, which is the National Jewish Databank site. And so anytime that you want to dig a little bit deeper into the demographics and the study, it will be available online to anybody who wants to take a look at it. I also want to let you know that Ira will be back in Indianapolis at the end of November, the 27th, 28th, and 29th, where we'll be doing more focused groups on specific areas. So if there's one area that you find especially fascinating or relevant to you personally or professionally that you'd like to learn more about, shoot us an email at the Federation, and we will get you connected with that deeper dive or that focused group in an area. So if you're specifically interested, for example, in geography of where the community lives, or Jewish education, or anti-Semitism, or Israel, or any of those things that we've now gleaned information on, let us know and we'll get you connected to the right group. And as I said, we printed up a really wonderful 12-page kind of executive summary of all the different information, and when you leave tonight, we didn't want to give it to you ahead of time or you would have seen all the answers. So when you leave tonight, please make sure to grab a copy of it. It'll also be on our website and available. We can email it to you or to anybody else who you think might be interested. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for taking part in the study and for helping us to kind of get these answers so we can plan for our future in a more realistic way. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Good evening. Is the mic okay? Yeah. Okay. I'm very delighted to be here tonight. To me, presenting the results of a study like this to the community is one of the funnest things that I do in my life. Okay? My ability to connect what I do academically and the skills I've learned as an academic to be able to help the Jewish community just thrills me. I have seen example after example in the communities I've done studies in communities others have done studies in, of how these studies are used to better the Jewish community. This will now become a data-driven Jewish community, in the sense that just about any decision that the community needs to make, there's probably something in the study that will help to make that decision in a better way. The study covers a large number of topics, as you can see here. We're going to touch at least a little on each of these topics tonight. Okay? There are a total of 846 slides, out of which we're showing you about 180 or so. I can give you a good reason why I should show you 846 of them, okay? Because there's an interesting story on every single one of them. But first, let's start off by talking about the survey methodology. I had a gentleman come up to me before the study, before the talk, and he said he didn't do the study, and he doesn't know any of his friends who did the study, and he doesn't know any of his friends' friends who did the study, so how can the study be right? How many people in this room were respondents? Good, so now you know some people who did the study, okay, well, I'd like to introduce you, you'd introduce yourself. No, the fact of the matter is that all of the literature, or almost all the literature in the social sciences, sociology, anthropology, geography, psychology, what did I leave out? Political science, economics, is based on the idea that if you want to know about a large group of people, if you sample from that large group of people correctly, you can tell about the large group from the small group that you sampled. Example, how many people voted in the last presidential election? No, put your hands down. The answer to that was 127 million. And how many people did Gallup interview when they told you that Hillary would win the popular vote by 3 percentage points? 1,200 out of 127 million. Because those 1,200 were selected using a procedure called random digit dialing. It means that the 1,200 can be used to represent the 127 million. And in this case, we did 600 interviews. Some of them done with random digit dialing, means that we can use the 600 interviews to tell you about the 8,500 Jewish households in greater Indianapolis. So let's talk about how random digit dialing is done first. We take the area code here, which is 317, and then we take the next 3 digits, which are known as the exchange code. We take all the exchange codes in Marion and Hamilton County, and we put 4 random numbers at the end, like you might pick out numbers to buy a lottery ticket. Now, can you see that when you create phone numbers that way, just at random, not every number you dial is going to reach a household, right? And not every number you dial certainly not every number is going to reach a Jewish household. But you will find Jewish households this way, whether they're on the Federation's mailing list or not, whether their last name is Cohen or their last name is Miller, whether they just moved into town or they've been living here their entire life. But when you ask, hello, I'm calling on behalf of a population study for the Jewish community sponsored by the Jewish Federation of Greater Indianapolis. We are not asking for donations or selling anything. We're interviewing households with 1 or more Jewish people. Was anyone in your household born or raised Jewish, or is anyone currently Jewish? If you get a yes, you continue with the interview. If you get a no, you thank the person very much. In this case, 1.7% of households that we reached said it was a Jewish household. That helps us in a major way to make a population estimate. But understand that when you call, you have no idea what you're going to find on the other end. Let me give you an example. Okay, these are a couple of examples from previous surveys. Sometimes you call a business and the person answers the phone quickly and you don't understand what they said. So that's what happened. And the person on the other end of the phone said, "You want to know if anybody here is Jewish? Do you know you called the city morgue?" And then the person said, "Would you like me to check the toe tags to see if anybody here is Jewish?" In another place, a woman answered and said, well, we have 50 women here, all married to the same Jew. It was a convent. Okay? So you're dialing numbers completely and utterly at random until you find a Jewish household. That means we properly cover those households who are unknown to the community at the moment. Now, because of this procedure, the phone was dialed for this project 306,834 times to get 600 interviews. Many households were called 6, 8, 10 times until someone finally picked up the phone. Now, in addition to doing some random digit dialing, we also did call off the Federation's mailing list, and we did call some people because their last name was Levy, and we even had a sample of people who, let's say, moved here from New York, decided not to get a landline, and they have a 212 area code on their cell phone. We can now buy cell phone numbers not by the area code on the cell phone, but by the zip code of the building address. So we got a fair sampling of that population as well. So that's a little bit about the methodology. We finished the interviewing on August 2nd. That was just about 90 days ago. And as you can see, we've got the results and we're ready to go. Debbie already told you about the main report. There's also a summary report, and there's loads of slides. One of the great things about these studies is we can compare Indianapolis, which will always be on the comparison bar charts with a red bar, with up to 45 other Jewish communities that have done studies since the year 2000 that ask a similar or the same question. We've decided that Columbus, Omaha, San Antonio, and St. Paul are particularly instructive comparisons, so we put the names of those communities in red. So let's start off with, well, how many Jews are there in Indianapolis? Well, I'm the editor of the American Jewish Yearbook, and so after I started this project, I looked back, and apparently sometime in 1937 you did some study and it showed that there were 10,000 Jews here. And since 1937, the American Jewish Yearbook has said there's 10,000 Jews here, okay? Who knows if the 10,000 was correct or not, but it must have changed at least some over the years. So we didn't know quite what to expect, but here's what we found. There are 8,500 Jewish households in greater Indianapolis. In those 8,500 Jewish households are 17,900 people, Jews, and a total of 23,500 people. What's the difference between Jews and persons in the households? Well, persons in the households include 5,600 non-Jews living in households with Jews, mostly the result of intermarriage and children not being raised as Jews. So if you were to ask me how many Jews live in Indianapolis, the answer is 18,000. If you were to ask me what is the size of the Jewish community, it's 23,500. Since the synagogues and the Federation and its agencies wish to serve all households containing one or more Jewish persons. There is, by the way, this is for Marion and Hamilton County. There's another 9 counties in this metropolitan area that we conservatively estimate have another 3,600 Jews. But we did no interviewing in those counties at all. Here's a map. These maps are up there, so you can look at them later if you like. We have the core area. We have north of core, which is most of Hamilton County, and south of core, which is most of Marion County, south of the core area. We also looked at where Jews live, and in fact, we found, right, that Jews are pretty clustered in this area right in here, okay? In the north of core is 44% of the households. In the core area is 37%. And south of core has about 20% of households. Come on, change slide, there we go. And using a procedure whereby we counted Jewish names in household directories, I estimate that there are probably about 1,000 more Jews here than there were in the year 2000. Without taking time to go through the methodology, you've shown a little bit of an increase over the past 7 years in the Jewish population. The number of households in north of core went up by 700 since the year 2010. In the core area, it went down by about 300, and south of core went up by about 100. Not major changes, but some indication, in fact, that the households are moving probably out of the core area and into north of core. Looked at another way, back in 2010, 38% of households were north of core, and now that's up to 44% of households, and the core area went down from 43% down to 37%. 3 zip codes shown here contain 46% of the Jewish population. So there is some level of concentration of the Jewish population. Look at the problems that they have, for example, in San Diego, where if you take the top 3 zip codes for Jews, you get only 16% of the population. Not much concentration, harder to serve. On the other hand, look at Middlesex County, where 3 zip codes contain 2/3 of Jews. Easier to serve. But for the most part, having almost half of households in just 3 zip codes means the Jewish population here does have some concentration. And I would add that if you look at those 3 zip codes, about 10% of people of households in those 3 zip codes are Jewish households. So while you're less than 2% of the entire 2-county area, you're about 10% in the area where most Jews are concentrated. 30% of the adults in Jewish households were born right here in Indianapolis. In total, 58% were born in the Midwest. That's all the green writing right here. And 7% of the adults were born in the former Soviet Union. The percentage who are locally born is 30%. Why do we care about that? Well, because locally born people are more likely to feel a part of this place, more likely to feel attached to it. Compare your 30% with Boca Raton, Florida, down here, where nobody was born in Boca, okay? But on the other hand, in places like Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, and Philadelphia, they have about 55% or higher who are locally born. About 8% of households have at least one member from the former Soviet Union. It's about 700 households with about 2,100 people. About 7% of households contain an LGBTQ person. And if we look at how many years are you living at your current address? In some communities, this is terribly uninteresting. In this community, it actually turned out to be quite illuminating. First, notice in north of core, 50% of the households are living at their current address for less than 5 years. That even affects things like fundraising. A person who's just moved in is using their extra money to furnish a new house, right? It's harder to get them to join things, to give donations, etc. Look at south of core here. Remember I showed that that wasn't really growing in the past 7 years? Yet, over half of households there are at their current address for less than 5 years. The explanation there has to be, and we can look at other data and see this, that young singles are moving in and out of the downtown area and not staying very long. How long are you living in Indianapolis? Well, about 50% are here for 20 years or more, and 16% are here for less than 5 years, which means that you have about 270 Jewish households moving in each year. Okay? We then asked people, well, will you definitely, probably not, or definitely not move in the next 3 years? And then if they were definitely or probably moving, we asked them where they were going to move. And it looks like about 15% of Jewish households have plans to leave Indianapolis within the next 3 years, including about 3% who say, I'm definitely out of here, and 12% who say, probably. Well, if you take, first thing to notice is the 15% with plans to leave the metropolitan area is quite high among Jewish communities. The second thing is, if we translate that 3% definitely moving out and 12% probably moving out, here are the numbers that we get. Moving out each year, we have 270 households moving in. Well, just assume that all the households definitely leaving do leave, and half the households even who say they're probably leaving, right, do leave. That gives you 250 leaving and 270 moving in. Really, you're not either gaining or losing Jewish population due to households moving in and households moving out. But there are other reasons why Jewish population can change. Sometimes people decide they're not Jewish anymore. Other times people decide they want to be Jewish, and they become Jews by choice. But the bigger reason that we're gaining, we actually might see some increase in Jewish persons, is this is probably one of the few Jewish communities outside the Hasidic communities. Anybody here have 10 kids? No, okay. Outside of the Hasidic community, you have 10 kids. That actually probably has more births than deaths. Take a look at this first. This is not Jews right here. This is all Americans. It's US Census data. And this is called the population pyramid. And what it says is, for example, 3.1% of Americans are females aged 0 to 4. 1.1% are males aged 85 and over. This is a typical shape for a developed country in the world of a population pyramid. Now let's take a look at the Jewish community here in Indianapolis. Quite a bit of difference, isn't there? Now, there's some really good news here. Notice how many more 0 to 4s and 5 to 9-year-olds there are than 10 to 14s and 15 to 19s. In other words, you have right now an increasing number of children in the community. The fact that you don't have very many 25 to 29-year-olds and even the 20 to 24s is, I think, due to the fact that the kids go off to college, let's say in Chicago, and they get their first job in Chicago, and they don't return here until somewhat later when they say, you know, I grew up in Indianapolis, I like it there, I'm going back. Okay? And that's probably what's happening right there. Lots of 30 to 44-year-olds, not very many people up here, and in fact, let's go back to the United States as a whole. 14% are age 65 and over, and 6% of Americans are age 75 and over. For the Jewish community here, it's 8 and 3%. I am so used to saying, look at how much older this Jewish community is than Americans in general. And in this community, I have to say, look how much younger this community is than Americans in general. This is a very young Jewish community. The percentage of the population that is under the age of 18 at 28% is the second highest in the country. The percentage of the population that's 18 to 34 is well above average. That 35 and 49-year-olds is the second highest in the country. These are the ones with kids. 50 to 64-year-olds, way down there. Those are baby boomers. 65 and over. You're at the bottom of the chart at only 8%. I mean, I live in Broward, it's 27%. We have more elderly in one building in Century Village. I think I missed my calling. I could have been a comedian, you know. My timing was good on that. then you have here. It's 8% of the population. That's all. For 75 and over, 3%. The median age is 35 and a half years. So half your population is under the age of 35. By geographic area, you'll notice that the core area has a somewhat higher percentage of elderly, quite low in north of core and south of core. North of Core has a relatively high percentage of children. 2/3 of the children live north of Core. 62% of the persons aged 65 and over. I have trouble calling 65 and over elderly now. As of June 10th, 2 years ago, I've had a big problem with that. But the Census Bureau calls 65 and over elderly, so we will too. 62% of your elderly live in the Core area. So there are different, the young are mostly north of Core. The older folks are more in the Core area. Average household size is the highest of any Jewish community in the country. It is higher than the average household size for all Americans. It is higher than the average household size in the U.S. Census for Marion and Hamilton County. It's a very high household size, which means you don't have very many one-person households, which lessens the need for some of the types of services that are offered by Jewish Family Services and county agencies. For household structure, 4 out of 10 households here have kids in them. Again, I'm used to saying that, the Jewish community does all its planning on the idea of mom, dad, and a couple of kids at home, and that's only 20% of households. Can't say that here. It's 40% of households. It's your biggest group. Planning should proceed here on the basis of having lots of households with children. In fact, households with children at home is 39% of households. That is one of the highest of all Jewish communities. This is what percentage of households are single elderly people living alone? 4%. That's it. What percentage of children live in a single parent household? That is, a 14-year-old goes home and there's just mom or there's just dad. And I've taken guesses in earlier, this is my 6th presentation of the day. We had guesses anywhere from 20% to 60%. And that explains why you need to do studies. You don't know what's out there. It's 8%. It's 34% for all Americans, but it's 8% for Jews in most places. That's about the average rate. What percentage of 75 and over people live alone? About 1 out of 4. For marital status, you have a very low rate of divorce here. In fact, only 13% of adults have been through a divorce. Most communities, that's more like 25%, 30% of adults are either currently divorced or divorced to remarried. You're at 13%. 68% are currently married. 20% are single, never married. 3% are living with a partner. And this is some results from Miami. I put these in here to remind me of Miami, where when I left yesterday it was 83 degrees, and when I got here it was 38 degrees. I thought I was dyslexic when I looked down at my phone. But I'm showing you this for the following reason. When I come back 10 years from now, when this study is hopefully redone, the thing we'll be mostly talking about is how has the community changed over the past decade. I can't tell you how it's changed since 1937. It's also irrelevant, right? But I can tell you what's going on in Miami on this. Back in 1994, the light blue, almost half, 47% of adults aged 18 to 34 were currently married. Today, it's 27%. Looking at U.S. Census data, the average age at first marriage for males is 28.8 years. If you wait longer to get married, single people do not generally join synagogues. So they're not synagogue members. Then you get married not at the age of 23, but you get married at the age of 28. You start having your children later. Chances are you're going to have 1 or 2 children instead of 2 to 3 children. And the period of time between when your first child needs to go to Hebrew school and your last child is bar mitzvah is shorter. This helps to explain to at least some extent the downward trend in synagogue membership all over the country is that people are getting married later. The single never married here is 23%, and that's rather high. Here's single Jewish adults. And you can see that most of them are under the age of 35. There's a clear problem here with the 75 and overs. You notice there's a lot more females than there are males. So I would recommend singles programs that work the following way. You get this group here to marry that group there. Okay? This is a very well-educated Jewish community. 86% have a bachelor's degree or higher. 86%. For all Americans, that's 30%. And you're at 86%. Very high for a Jewish community, too, you might notice. 62% are employed full-time. Only 9% are retired. The employed full-time leads the nation. The retired is the lowest in the nation. That clearly affects your pool of volunteers to do volunteer work in the Jewish community. Well, 63% earned $100,000 or more last year. And 1 out of 5 households earned $200,000 or over. By the way, to the credit of this Jewish community, and probably in part because 86% have a college degree and suffered through a sociology course, 88% of the respondents answered this question. That's the highest for 45 communities. People were not afraid to tell us their income in these large categories that we used, and that was good. This is an important indicator of things. The median household income here is $129,000. Now, all of these communities' median household incomes are adjusted for inflation because you can't compare dollars in the year, let's say 2005, with dollars in the year 2017 without adjusting for inflation. So this is a very high income community here. The median income in the United States as a whole is $54,000. Your median income is $129,000. The median income is much higher in north of core, 147, than it is in the core area at 119, and south of core is at only 95,000. Now, here's what I usually say about the 65 to 74 and the 75 and overs. We do the 65 to 74 separately because they're mostly baby boomers, making them a different generation from the 75 and overs. And on just about every other copy of this slide for all the other communities, the income for the 65 to 74 is something like double the income for the 75 and overs. And my recommendation is that if you're giving breaks to people because they get older, they ought to get a break when they hit 75 and over. There's just one problem with that recommendation. Your data don't say that. For your data, the 75 and overs are actually making a bit more money than the 65 to 74s. I've never seen that before. The people who are not making quite as much money are the non-elderly singles and the elderly singles. So in terms of dues and fee structures, it seems to me in this community that the distinction that people have to make is between households with one person living alone and households with more than one person. Synagogue members' income is somewhat higher than non-members' income. On these types of slides, I put into red the ones I want to talk about. We don't have time to talk about all of these things. Okay, next. Jewish identification. Let's begin with, do you consider yourself Orthodox, Conservative, Reconstructionist, Reform, or just Jewish? Now, this is a matter of self-identification. Okay? I mean, we have some older women say, well, I guess I'm Orthodox. And the reason turns out to be that the shul her husband didn't used to go to was Orthodox. Okay? And then we have people who say, oh, I don't do anything anymore, so I guess I'm Reformer. Some of the just Jewish belong to a synagogue, some of the Orthodox don't. So this doesn't necessarily reflect synagogue membership or even the religious practice. We have people who tell us that they're conservative and never go to synagogue services. We have people who tell us they're Orthodox and don't keep kosher. So this is a self-identifying philosophical question. Your percentage Orthodox at 4% is a typical number for an American Jewish community. The percentage conservative is the lowest in the country. Now, that's because, in part, because you have 7% who think of themselves as Reconstructionists, and you have a synagogue that's conservative/Reconstructionist. But you know what? Even if you added the 7% Reconstructionist to the 10% conservative, that puts you at 17%, you'd still be right here. It'd be very low. So this is not a community with a large conservative, with a large number of Jews who think of themselves as conservative. Reform here is about average, and just Jewish is above average. Attitudes toward being Jewish. In 2013, the Pew Research Center did a profile of Jewish Americans. They spent, are there reporters here? Okay, any reporter, you can't use the dollar figure I'm about to say. They spent almost $2 million on it. Okay, so it was very, very well done survey of American Jews. And they asked 3 questions here that we thought were good questions to see how Jews in Indianapolis' answers would compare. I'm proud to be Jewish. 99% of the respondents agreed with that, compared to 94% nationwide. I have a strong sense of belonging to the Jewish people. 89% agreed, compared to 75% nationwide. And I have a special responsibility to care for Jews in need around the world. 81% agreed, compared to 63% nationwide. So we're at a high level of agreement with these 3 statements. Religious practices. Do you always, usually, sometimes, or never participate in a Passover Seder, light Hanukkah candles, light Sabbath candles, have a Christmas tree? If they never lit Sabbath candles, then we said, do you always, usually, sometimes, or never observe the Sabbath in any other way? Like having friends or family over for a Shabbat dinner. And we got relatively high percentages, right? In fact, 70% said, I always do that, I usually do that, or I sometimes do that. Mezuzah on the front door is 57%, kosher home is 12%, kosher in and out of the home is 6%, and refrain from using electricity on the Sabbath, which was our way of saying Shomer Shabbos, we get about 1%. So of the 300 Orthodox Jews in town, about 75% are kosher in and out of the home, and also don't turn lights on and off on the Sabbath. For this question here, we used to ask people if they drove on Shabbat as a way of telling whether they were Shomer Shabbos or not. There was a problem with that question. One woman in a group like this raises her hand and said, well, I was respondent, and when I was asked that question, I said I didn't drive on Shabbat. But then again, I don't drive on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday either. So that's, one of the things you learn about survey research is sometimes you make mistakes and you fix them the next time. This is the best demographic study ever done because I made all the mistakes possible on the previous 51. Okay? Participating in a Passover Seder, just to show you some of the comparisons, you're below average on that. Take a look at mezuzah on the front door by age. It's actually highest for the under 35s. Passover Seder, highest for the under 35s. Hanukkah candles, highest if you're under 50. Christmas tree is higher for younger people as well. But what you'll notice here is the concept that only that the younger people are not involved in religious practice and the older people are. Doesn't hold up in any community in the country. And we found the result here for the under 35s that we believe is due at least in part to the Birthright program. We're starting to see some impact of that program on the people who are 18 to 34. Synagogue attendance. 32% of people in this community never go to a service unless you invite them to a wedding or a bar bat mitzvah. 20% go once a month or more. Attendance at services once per month or more is really about average. It's typical for a Jewish community. and 32% never attending a service is also about average. Types of marriage. If we take 100 married couples in this community, 55 of 100 are intermarried couples. That is, one spouse was born Jewish and the other spouse is not Jewish. So 55 out of 100 couples, that's the situation. For 11 out of 100, one person was born Jewish, the other spouse was not, but the other spouse now either converted formally or considers themselves to be Jewish. In 34 marriages out of 100, both spouses were born as Jews, so that's an in-marriage. So your couple's intermarriage rate is 55%. Within synagogues, 28% of the households are intermarried. If you look at non-members of synagogues, 2/3 are intermarried couples. So to expand synagogue membership here, since single people aren't joining in great numbers, it would seem to me that appealing to intermarried couples might be one strategy. The intermarriage rate here of 55% is among the highest in the country. The Pew Research Center in their study that we talked about before is at 61% for the country as a whole. By age of the head of the household, for the under 35s it's 60%, for the 35 to 49s it's 60%, it goes down to about 50% when you're between 50 and 74, and then it goes down to about 1/3 when you are 75 and over. Now, question. We have a Jewish community here, a little Jewish community. It's Jewish community number 79. What's the intermarriage rate? Abraham married Sarah, and Howard Wolowitz married Bernadette Rostenkowski. The Big Bang fans or Big Bang Theory fans are giggling out there, okay? What's the intermarriage rate? As we've calculated it up to now, there are 2 married couples here, right? One of the 2 is an intermarriage, so it's 50%. And everything I showed you up till now was the 50%, equivalent to 50%. But another way to calculate the intermarriage rate is how many Jews live in Jewish community number 79? 3, right? How many of those 3 Jews have a non-Jewish spouse? 1. So that's 33%. So the couple's rate is 50%, the individual rate is 33%. Fine. Now, if we take the 55% couples intermarriage rate that we saw, it becomes a 38% individual rate, just like the 50 becomes 33. But then, do you agree that not all Jews are married, right? So I've recalculated an intermarriage rate which takes into account people who are single and not married, and 25% of all Jewish adults, both married and single, are intermarried. And the reason I'm going through this is not to confuse you with 2 different intermarriage rates, but when I don't go through this, I hear things afterwards, like after these talks, like, wow, I can't believe that 55% of Jews are married to non-Jews. No, they're not. Of married Jews, 38% are married to non-Jews. And if we were to go out in here and pick 100 Jews at random and bring them in this room, 25 of those 100 would be married and married to someone who's not Jewish. Okay? So it is important, when you're dealing with statistics like this, sometimes it's difficult to get these things straight. It's 50% of couples, but it's 38% of individual people who are married who are intermarried. Okay. What's happening to the children in intermarriages? Well, 62% are being raised as Jews. That's good news. And 9.1% are people in this community are Jews by choice. They were not born Jewish, but they consider themselves to be Jewish now. Next, synagogues. 29% of households claim synagogue membership. We counted the synagogues, and the truth is 24%. So the actual number is 2,100, and the survey predicts something like 2,400. That's actually pretty good. It's not that far off. Synagogue members are more likely to stay on the phone than non-members, so these surveys will always be a little biased toward synagogue members. In households with children, notice how low you are. 1/3 of households with children belong to synagogues. Okay? Based on the survey that we gave to the synagogues, not the telephone survey, of those who belong to a synagogue, 12% belong to an Orthodox synagogue, 42% to a conservative synagogue, including Reconstructionists, and 46% to a Reform synagogue. We asked another question, and we started to ask this question about 5 studies ago. In the past year, did anyone in your household participate in or attend any type of program or religious service at or sponsored by a local synagogue? While only 29% are members of a synagogue, 62% set foot in a synagogue last year. So the impact of synagogues on the lives of Jews in Indianapolis is far greater than the percentage who are members. The same way at the JCC, many more people participate than are actually members. In the past year, did you participate in or attend any program or religious service at or sponsored by Chabad? And we got about 16% there. So Chabad has a significant impact on 16% of Jewish households. Next to the JCC, 28% claim to be members, and that's very high. 56% participated in something at the JCC in the past year. You're doing that right now. You're at the JCC participating in something. 28% participated but didn't join. Jewish organizations, these are things like the ADL, the American Jewish Committee, or Hadassah. You've got 16% belong to one of those types of organizations. And about half of the community are members of a synagogue and or the JCC and or a Jewish organization. Okay, that's about half the community. So half the community pays dues to nothing Jewish. Summarizing this, synagogue membership is 29%, being a participant in the synagogues is 62%, attending Chabad is 16%, JCC member 28%, JCC participant 56%, a Jewish organization is 16%, and joining something Jewish is 48%. How much do you feel like you are part of the Jewish community of Greater Indianapolis? Very much, somewhat, not very much, not at all. The percentage very much or somewhat at 55% is average. Jewish education of adults when they were children. 71% of adults had some Jewish education when they were children. That's well below average for a Jewish community. 36% attended or worked at a Jewish overnight camp as children. Going to a Jewish overnight camp as children does seem to have some impact on Jewish behavior as adults. For example, if you went to a Jewish overnight camp, 40% are current synagogue members. If you didn't go to an overnight camp, 26% are current synagogue members. Adult Jewish education. This is attended organized adult Jewish education program or class in the past year. And you can see the males are in blue here, the females are in pink, and here are the age groups. And really across all the age groups, with the somewhat of an exception here for 50 to 64-year-old males for whatever reason, there's pretty good attendance at adult education types of programs. But, and this is more important, first we asked people the question you saw here. Did you participate in any organized adult Jewish education program or class in the past year? 25% overall said yes. Then we asked, in the past year, did you participate in any other type of adult Jewish education, like online, with a rabbi, or studying with friends? The 25 goes to 38. And then if you ask people, did you go to a Jewish museum last year or participate in some type of Jewish cultural event? We gave them some examples. All of a sudden, you're looking at over 50%. So sometimes we might get discouraged by, the fact that lots of people don't do any types of adult Jewish education, but in fact, they are. Much higher percentages are doing it informally, and there seems to be a lot more interest in Jewish cultural things than there may be in more religiously oriented programming. For preschool, we found that about half the children in a preschool are attending a Jewish preschool. For day school, we found out that about 78% of people sending their kids to a private school have selected a Jewish day school. If we look at the attendance of 5 to 12-year-olds, 46% of the 5 to 12-year-olds are currently getting some Jewish education. And that is actually rather low. And we also, we're not going to stop and look at all this, but we collected from the synagogues and the day school and the BJE, we collected their enrollment data, make it part of the report, so that 10 years from now, we can look back and see if these numbers have gone up or down. And here we're looking at 13 to 17-year-olds. And what we did here was to look at the following and say, look, if a person hasn't gotten any Jewish education by the time they hit age 13, they're probably not going to get any, at least as a child, right? So if you look at the 13 to 17-year-olds, what you'll notice that 86% of them did get some Jewish education. Now, that could have been at the day school and intensively, or they could have gone, 1 year to first grade Sunday school and then quit, but they did get some. So 86% of children in this Jewish community who are being raised Jewish do get some Jewish education. Informally, the vast majority of people sending their kid to an overnight camp are selecting a Jewish overnight camp. We looked at the Federation and its various agencies, so that, for example, 49% of respondents said they're very familiar with the JCC, 40% are somewhat familiar, and 11% knoweth not the JCC. Okay? If they were very or somewhat familiar, we asked them, what is your perception of the JCC? Excellent, good, fair, or poor? You'll notice that the JCC is 45% excellent, 44% good, and 11% fair or poor. So being very familiar with the Federation, this is good news, is 30%, and that's well above average among Jewish communities. Being not at all familiar with the Federation is well below average. And then we can look at this, and we're not going to do this right now, and say, okay, overall being very familiar with the Federation is 30%, the 75 and overs are 39%, that's a bit higher. And this is done for all different types of groups. Excellent perceptions of the Federation is about average, and and there's fair or poor perceptions, which is about average, and then we can do the same thing. Overall, 31% have excellent perceptions. Again, that's a bit higher for the 75 and over group, and it's really high for the Reconstructionist Jews as well. And there it is for a whole bunch of other groups. For those donating 500 and over to the Federation, 66% think that the Federation is excellent. Sometimes you get weird things, by the way, like they give $500 and over, they think the Federation is poor. You have one or two of those, but they're still giving the money. So, social service needs. Only 11% have any long-term health types of problems. Okay, and that of course is quite low because you have a very small population, age 65 and over. Under social service needs as well, let me just take a look at one of these. Where you have a relatively high need is for marital, family, or personal counseling. 16% of households said they needed marital, family, or personal counseling in the past year, and that's because you have a younger population. What we find when we look at the need for counseling by age is that the perceived need for it in people over the age of 65 is very small. And I think it has to do with generations and people's willingness to say they need counseling. okay? But nevertheless, what this says is 16% needed it. The dark green here means they needed it and got it through the Jewish community. The light green is the percentage who needed it but got it outside the Jewish community, and the black is the unmet need. In the report itself, all of these needs are translated into the number of households that needed this. And we tested this for about 10 or so social services. Here you can see how high the need for counseling is in Indianapolis compared to other Jewish communities. There's a need for services for people who are 75 and over, and actually here the need for in-home health care is very low compared to other Jewish communities. So if you look here for in-home health care, it's at 11%, and that's very low. In Broward County, they took that percentage there to the United Way and became a United Way provider for in-home health care, something they wanted to be. And they were able to say, this is a big problem in the Jewish community. We'll obviously serve both Jews and non-Jews, but here's the reason we want to do it. If you needed senior housing or a nursing home, would you very much prefer, some would prefer, have no preference, or rather not use a Jewish nursing home or senior housing? And we get 31% saying, everything else being equal, that they would very much prefer Jewish adult care facilities. The bad news is that it's way lower than all the other Jewish communities, probably about 35 there, that have asked this question. For Israel, about half of households have been to Israel, 32% on a Jewish trip with a Jewish group and 19% without a Jewish group. The 51% who've been to Israel is about average. The 32% who've been to Israel, like on a mission or with a synagogue, is the highest in the country. And if we send people to Israel, they're more likely to be involved in Jewish behaviors. So I took synagogue participant here as 82% if you went with a Jewish trip, 68% if you went on a general trip, and 47% if you haven't been to Israel at all. Now, of course, there's the chicken and egg thing here. Those people who are participating in synagogues are more likely to go to Israel. Okay? So, and I'm sure it's both. I'm sure it's that's true, and I'm sure it's also true that going to Israel makes you more of a synagogue participant when you get back. Come on, there we go. 24% of the kids have been to Israel. That's actually rather high. You have 500 households this translates to, who said, yeah, the cost prevents me from sending one of my children to Israel. It's a good number of households there. Are you extremely, very, somewhat, or not attached to Israel? The 44% who are extremely or very attached is below average. By age, big discussion going on now among people in the Jewish community, academics, as to whether or not the younger generation is more attached, is less attached to Israel than is the older generation. And there's differences of opinion on whether that's true or not. What is true is that if you go back 40 years ago, people were asking the same question. And what would appear is that as people get older, they get more attached to Israel. But nevertheless, if you look here, this is extremely or very attached. For the under 35s is 45%, which is quite a bit higher than the 35 to 49s. Again, almost none of the 35 to 49s have been on birthright, but lots of the under 35s have. And that may be what we're seeing here. Anti-Semitism. 14% of our respondents say they experienced anti-Semitism in Indianapolis in the past year. It's about average. For the children, it's very high. 29% of the kids experienced anti-Semitism in the past year here in Indianapolis. Now, if you keep in mind, if it's 29% just last year, well, some people who experienced it last year didn't experience it the year before, but others did. So a good portion of children in this community are clearly running into anti-Semitism. 5% see a great deal of anti-Semitism here in Indianapolis. 26% see a moderate amount. 56% see a little, and 13% none at all. The 32% who see a great deal or a moderate amount is well below average. It's good news. On the media, you've got about half the community who always, usually, or sometimes read the Jewish Federation news. Now, if you multiply these three percentages by the 8,500 households, you come out with 4,400 households. Then I asked Debbie, how many copies of the Jewish Federation news do you send out? And she said 4,400 in an email, and I almost fell off my chair because it's exactly what this says. Okay, we're not so lucky on everything in terms of predicting the reality. On this we were, but the 22% always or usually reading it is rather low. Going to the website at 27% is rather high. Of course, some of these comparisons aren't so good. You know, if the study is 10 years old, everyone was using the internet less 10 years ago, okay? But nevertheless, this is comforting. 1 out of 4 people in the community did go to the Federation website for something last year. Last topic is Jewish Federation donations, and we're gonna skip over some of these in the interest of time. First, 31% claim to have donated. That's one of those figures that never comes out right, okay? People made a donation to the JCC, and they know they kind of overpaid, and they confused the JCC with the Federation, so they say yes. Or a woman who said to me on one interview, go back to that organization that began with an F. I said, the Federation. Yes, right. She said, I know I said I gave to that. My daughter came home from Sunday school, and we bought a tree in Israel. Is that the Federation? No, that's probably the Jewish National Fund, I said to her. Well then, change my answer to a no. Not all respondents are going to be that conscientious about their answers. Some people are simply confused about the Jewish community. Oh, we asked if you gave in the past year, and they gave the year before, so they say yes. Or they made a donation in 1967, so they say yes, right? So there are, or at this point, even though you were on the phone for 20 minutes, right? You say, aha, here comes the ask, and you say yes. But anyway, 31% claim to have been asked, and they did give, and 11% claim to have been asked, and they didn't give. So all of these folks here, the two greens, were the people who were asked for a gift. 11% then, out of 42% said no, that's 25% said no, so the turn down rate is about 25%. 58% were not asked to donate. The 31% claiming to donate is below average for a Jewish community. The percentage not asked to donate is actually about average. The turn down rate of 25% saying the Federation, no, I'm not going to give, is about average. And we're going to skip over some of this greater detail right here in the interest of time. Here, though, is a good example of where your campaign looks quite a bit better than other Jewish communities. You've only got 22% of your givers being over the age of 65. In many communities, what we're just looking at, 40%, 50% of the donors are over the age of 65. Right? And of course, in another, particularly those over 75, in another few years, they may very well be out of money to give. We also looked at the annual campaign, and again, we're skipping over some. Here is the annual campaign, go back to here, adjusted for inflation to 2016 dollars. So in constant dollars, back in 2006, the Federation's campaign was collecting $6.2 million, and now it's down to about $3.8 million. It's been level for the past 5 years, but it's considerably down from what it was a decade ago. The number of households who donated is down over the past decade in a significant way. Okay. Again, I'm going to skip ahead here in the interest of time. 31% claim to donate to the Jewish Federation of Greater Indianapolis. 45% give to some Jewish charity last year, be it Federation or rather some other Jewish charity other than the Federation. 54% gave to something Jewish, could be the Federation or something else. So that means that like half this community did not make a donation of anything to anything Jewish in this town in the past year. Half did, half didn't. Over 80% give to non-Jewish charities, and almost 90% gave some money to some charity, be it Jewish or non-Jewish. For wills, about 13% have something in their will for a Jewish charity. Okay, that's a pretty typical response. Politically, last topic. 16% of our respondents say they're Republicans. 55% say they're Democrats. And 29% say they're independents. This is because you're high here, because you've got a young community. One of the things we're learning about millennials is they don't like to join things, and they don't like to label themselves. Okay, that's what all the focus groups tell us. And the result of that is that the younger folks are less likely to identify with a political party. They're more likely to call themselves just Jewish, even if they're going to a conservative or a reform synagogue, whatever. They don't like to put themselves into categories. So, by age, I think one last slide here. Look at the percentage Republican. It's 13% for the under 35s, and it's 10% for the 35 to 49s. The only group it's kind of high for are the 50 to 64-year-olds, not quite sure why. But there's no evidence in this community of a growing young Orthodox Jewish Republican population. 95% are registered to vote. And under 35, it's 93% are registered to vote. And that takes you through 194 slides, mostly relatively quickly.